knowing that.
Okay. So welcome, everyone. Thank you again for joining us. And we have Christian Bergman, who's going to be monitoring the chat for us. So please feel free to make any comments, or if you have any questions or sharings, you can put them in the chat as we go along. And we have Richard Moss here.
Where? So as always, we invite you to recognize that there's a possibility of a deeper receptivity and listening, a dropping into yourself. And we like to do a simple ritual and light a candle, as we always do before our councils. And those of you that have been in some of the retreats know that the team always has a beautiful array of candles and flowers and things that are lit. Because I learned long, long ago, in a beautiful environment, the subconscious message is, I deserve this, I'm worth it. And when we do light a candle, it's like our sacred fire, our ceremonial fire, and we're all together sitting around it. And shifting from the busyness and necessity of daily life to a preparation to explore and try to deeply understand both the inner world and the outer world that we're seeing. So today, just for a process of centering together, we have a beautiful piece of music called All This Joy by John Denver. It's on his album Higher Ground, which is a brilliant album if you haven't ever come across it.
All this joy, all this sorrow, all this promise, all this pain, such is life. Such is being, such is spirit, such is love. City of joy, city of sorrow, city of promise, city of pain, such is life, such is being, such is spirit, such is love. World of joy, world of sorrow, world of promise, a world of pain, but such is life. Such is being. Such is spirit. Such is love. All this joy, all this sorrow, all this promise, all this pain, such is life. Such is being. Such is spirit. Such is love. Such is spirit. Such is love.
The combination of poems and words are one of the deepest ways to nourish our hearts, nourish the feeling intelligence and within us. It's always been central to my retreats and programs, and it's central to my personal practice to sing and improvise words and improvise melodies sometimes. Doesn't matter where I start from, but by the end, something is deeply, deeply still and ready for deeper self-witnessing. So at the end of our last webinar, I said to you today, we wanted to focus on basically on relational intelligence, relational consciousness. And we call that a third consciousness. In our relationship, for example, there's Richard, there's Kathy, and then there's our relationship, which is a third consciousness. But before we go there, we wanted to start with an image that all of us have seen, probably by now, over and over and over and over again with different detail. About a month ago, in fact, we became aware of it just as we finished, the day after we were with you, I think it was on January 5th for one of the webinars. The next day we were doing a webinar in French and English. And we were in such an exquisite energy, I think not only Kathy and I, but the whole gathering, wherever people were in the world at that time, only to get off of it and discover that a mob had rioted in Washington, D.C. and had broken into the Capitol building. So of course you've seen that and you've heard commentary and commentary and commentary. What happened in the following week is a lot of people reached out to us and asked us, what did we see? What did we see? Because we tuned that in and watched it live. So we want to start with what, certainly speaking for myself, Kathy will speak for herself, what I saw. And First of all, it was heartbreaking. It was also very, very understandable. I saw people, obviously visually, I saw their faces. I heard the sound. We all felt the energy of mob consciousness. But what I saw, very much like the diagrams we used, I believe 2 webinars back, I saw people who the assemblage point of their consciousness was nothing more than the sense of me. I saw that diagram. For me, those kinds of images of the mandala and other are so vivid to me that I can transpose them onto an image of people. I know moment by moment by moment, if a person's not aware, then the assemblage point of their consciousness, what they're acting from, is me, which means they are completely programmed by the past, the way they anticipate the future, all their beliefs and judgments about themselves, and all their beliefs and judgments about everyone else. And so for me, it was just, I was seeing literally a mass action of unconsciousness. And it was heartbreaking, not because I felt the capital is sacrosanct in some way. It was heartbreaking because it happens all over the world all the time. A kind of robotic individuals that are simply victims of their pasts, victims of the stories they tell themselves.
And it was very clear that, their awareness was completely collapsed into either a belief or a rage or, and they were acting from that place. It's like when someone really collapses into anger and there's this like blind rage. So it was almost like there was this blind, for many people, there was this blind rage of, we need to save the country, and their beliefs of that were just not founded in any reality.
They had an identity. They were patriots.
Yeah.
They believed the stories they'd been told because they didn't have the capacity in themselves to step beyond a conceptual structure. I call those kinds of events now porcupines can fly events. Porcupines can fly. And I think maybe I've talked about this in earlier webinars, I'm not sure, but one of the things we've learned in neuroscience over the last 20 years or so, we've learned from people who have had either strokes that have limited their right brain, left the left brain intact, or vice versa. But also there's a very, very uncommon form of surgery, but it's now been done some hundreds of times to stop a very severe form of epilepsy, of seizure disorder. A surgical intervention is done where a structure in the brain called the corpus callosum is cut, it's severed. And what the corpus callosum does is it allows the cortex and parts of the left brain and right brain to connect. In essence, instead of a shared brain with 2 different functioning lobes, 2 different sides, left brain, right brain, we now have only left brain and only right brain, but in a human being, just like you and me. And in ordinary circumstances, you can't tell that these people have had such a major form of surgery. But you can under certain circumstances, particularly in relational situations. One of the pieces of research was to you can speak into only the right brain of such a person or only the left brain of such a person. You can hide what you're doing from the right brain if you're talking to the left brain and vice versa. And so the researchers had an idea, how do they understand reality? And so they used a simple form of logic. A logic is a syllogism, or a thing called a syllogism. if A is greater than B and B is greater than A, then A is smaller than B. Something like that, right? Except this specific syllogism was this. Mammals can fly. Porcupines are mammals. Therefore, porcupines can fly. And when that was told to the left brain, it said, yes, that's true. Every single time, and every one of those people, yes, that's true. Of course, when it was told to the right brain, at the moment the syllogism is finished, the right brain is laughing. The person laughs. They know it's absurd. First of all, only some mammals fly, right? In fact, they only glide, you know, and you know, birds fly, but I don't know that they're considered mammals per se. But the thing is, porcupines do not fly. Porcupines walk around on the ground and they have those quills sticking out of them. In case you don't know what a porcupine is, you know, or you have a different word in another language. My dogs have gotten into porcupines. That's not fun. And porcupines don't fly, so it's absurd. What we saw, that what I call this porcupines can fly event, was people who believed the election was stolen based on being lied to. They believed many QAnon fairy tales, bizarre, false, crazy belief systems. Right? They believed that, well, there's just so many of them. They believed that the killings in one of the major terrible shootings in one of the schools never happened, or it happened, but it was because it was purposely done to steal gun rights from people. I mean, they believed crazy, crazy things because porcupines can fly whenever that's given to the left brain. So I saw that out there. A porcupines can fly event. And there's so many of them. People bid up the stock share recently with, what was it called? Something GameStop?
Oh, GameStop, yeah.
Another porcupine can fly event. We're going to, you know, stock's not worth that, but so what? Let's punish the big money. So 1 million people get on Reddit and they buy something that's not, and they drive the price up, which and the stock market is shaking. And the same thing happens in panics. Porcupines can fly. There's no ground in people. So why does this happen? What can we assume? What can we assume with a great deal of substantial insight about why a mob like that would form, why people would do that? So this week, Kathy was streaming her Facebook feed. And suddenly something.
Once a month or so.
Yeah, sure. You don't, okay, tell them what happened.
Yeah, no. So I came across a TED Med talk. It was a pediatrician. Her name is Nadine Burke Harris. And the title of her talk was, what was the title of her talk?
How childhood trauma affects health across a lifetime.
Anyway.
Alan will put that up in the chat, and so you can go to it.
So I called Richard over and we listened to the talk, which was fascinating. It was done in 2014. And you can take it from there. Yeah.
Okay. She talked about what are called ACEs, adverse childhood experiences. And an example of what they mean by an ACE would be physical, emotional, sexual abuse. It would also be neglect. It would be parental neglect. It would be parents that are caught in substance dependency. It would be domestic violence in the home. It would be physical, I already said, also physical neglect, emotional neglect. It was if you had a parent with mental illness, if you had a parent who had been incarcerated, and if the parents had separated or divorced, each one of those things was called an ACE. And they found out that at least...
and they were given one score.
Yeah, one ACE.
One ACE for each. Yeah.
It turns out that 67% of the population in the United States, based on a study of 17,500 adults that were interviewed and evaluated, have at least one ACE. And that 12.6%, 1 out of 8 people, has 4 of these. And when you have 4 of them, you have a 2.5 times increase of chronic obstructive pulmonary disease because you smoke. You have an increase of hepatitis by 2.5 times. You have an increase of depression by 4.5 times, and you have an increase of suicidality by 12 times. If someone has 7 ACEs, they have a 3-time higher incidence of lung cancer, a 3.5 time incidence of heart disease, and a 20-year loss of life expectancy. So,
and a very, you said the 12 times suicide.
yeah, right. So that talk is really worth watching. This is not something that's new to us. Kathy and I have observed that over the years, with the thousands of people that have come through my retreats, that I've had 10 days or 7 days to be with these people, or 3 days, I mean, thousands, tens of thousands. We see that the limit of consciousness, the limit of the ability to go or access deeper consciousness is absolutely defined by this kind of trauma that's embedded from early childhood. It's embedded in the body. It's embedded as a kind of body sensual, sensate, somatic memory. This is why we have been emphasizing that meditation must not be just sit down, get quiet, and try to rise above everything, but meditation needs to be get quiet, come into the body, and begin to learn to create space for these difficult sensations. Clearly, that crowd of people, very, very wounded people because of very wounded parents, probably very wounded grandparents, because it's passed on generation after generation after generation, don't have the ability to differentiate truth from lie. Porcupines can fly because if someone tells it to them often enough and they believe it, and there's any logical progression of assumptions based on that belief, it's true. But it all starts with fear. All starts with fear. And so it starts with trauma. It starts with damage. Kathy will speak in a moment about what she has worked with clients. But again and again, if someone would come to a retreat and have what we would call a borderline personality, that is, the ego structure was not solid enough because of these adverse childhood events.
Yeah, a real fragility to be able to even hold anything. Yeah.
So they would begin to act out in the programs. They would voluntarily decide to leave, or I would take them aside and talk to them and suggest it wasn't appropriate. In fact, to help people that have these things, the transformational retreats that I was doing were not appropriate. What I also observed and have written about many times is that it was very easy to shift people temporarily to a very deep spaciousness and activate new potentials of consciousness. But when they go home, the limits on consciousness within themselves and in all their relationships will be these areas of trauma that haven't had a chance to be engaged through conscious practice and learn to be held and touched very softly. Well, you're so gifted at being with people and guiding them through it. You've heard us say, so I'm going to turn it back to you in a moment. You've heard us say that even with these kinds of things, with somebody that can help you access your aware self process and help you support you in that and help you journey in your body, you can overcome these things. Awareness trumps even the earliest trauma.
And not only overcome them, but really thrive. It's through the experience and then through the healing of the experiences that's the post-traumatic growth. So again, we talked before about the direct correlation between the severity of the trauma is directly correlated with the potential for growth. So,
yeah. And often they're looking there at trauma that happens later in life as an adult. the trauma that happens with these adverse childhood events is so embedded into the structure of identity that it takes a much deeper work. And you've worked with two people very traumatized. One was sexually traumatized, and at a young age. And what did you have to guide them with?
Well, it's sort of layer after layer, and it shows up in different ways. Like one of the things that for her, she was abused by a neighbor for quite some time, starting when she was 5 years old. And she had forgotten, like had repressed the memory, and then, but working, and in fact,
the memories started coming back later in life.
But essentially that experience really took her out of her being. And she wasn't supported by, I think, her mother or her parents, and so she was holding this all herself. And in fact, this ended up driving her to even create a place where people could.
You have to be careful.
Yeah.
We have to protect.
No, I know. But anyway, but guiding her in with the sensation in her body, and really holding that traumatized child within her, and from there the healing begins to happen. So,
and it can. Years and years ago, I for 10 years worked with a person who was using lithium for bipolar disease. And after about 10 years of meditation practice and different retreats, conversations, she was able to get off of lithium, because all of the practice was, okay, what's the sensation the lithium's protecting you from? Can you hold it? Can you hold it? Mm-hmm. And so that person went on eventually to discover that she could center very deeply, but also she had a horse, and she began to realize how healing that was for her. So she went on to create a place where children and even business people could come and work on emotional intelligence simply by riding horses and being around horses. So there's so many pathways to the healing, but the best pathway will be healthier and healthier parents, less and less ACEs in childhood, obviously. So what happens when you have two people who are not yet awakened enough in their aware self and they're in relationship? When a me meets a me. So we have a diagram to show you as we progress toward the notion of third consciousness and then into our deep meditation for today about that. So Alan, if you'll put up the first diagram. I call it, many people call it a transactional relationship. So on your left, you see me, and that's a self system that's, as we have shown you, that's the baby creates over the first 9 years of life. And then that self system is constantly determined by how it remembers the past, how it anticipates the future, and all of its beliefs about itself and all of its conceptualizations and beliefs about others. And so that me it's not really an aware person. It's only aware in terms of its goals, its fears. And what the consciousness in that me is about is protecting itself from fear by developing some form of personal power, by feeling, it's constantly working for some form of security and some form of control. Over to the right is another person just like that. And when they meet, they can start projecting all the positive things on the other and fall in love. What did you call that? The projection of the positive things?
Golden shadows.
The golden shadows. But after a while, they start projecting the darkness, the dark shadows, that aspect of shadow. They fall in love and they fall out of love and then into vicious divorces. Okay, that's a transactional relationship because it's about safety, all about safety. And deep down, and gradually people don't have much aliveness in it. So they end up maybe at best comfortable companions. and they've learned the territory they can't walk into. So their intimacy is completely limited by, oh, I better not go there because she'll react, or I better not go there because he'll react. And neither takes responsibility for the reactions. So there's a great deal of anger, a great deal of conflict in these relationships, a great deal of projection, constant projection, and conflict.
Suffering.
And suffering, and blame, and suffering, and more suffering. Of course, there is a possibility, because in all of us is the spark for the awakening process, the spark of what wakes us up. And we showed you in those diagrams back there that this part here we called when the assemblage point of consciousness is me, the ego. Okay, when the self system assemblage point is me, the separate self. And that the work of awakening, the work of spiritual practice, the work and the purpose of these teachings is to awaken within each of us a process of self-awareness, an aware self process. And here's a different diagram. So there you go. Here's what we mean by third consciousness. There is a person who has distance from their self-system, from their me. Person on the left can stand more clearly in their awake self, in their aware self. They have a relationship with their me stories and their you stories, their past and future stories. The person on the right also, to similar degree, and through different ways, our paths have been very, very different, has awakened to that aware self and now has distance. The circle around that circle with the me, you, past, and future in it is the self-system that was built by 9 years old. It's as if you're at the center in your aware consciousness. Out there is the self-system you need. That's the self-system that tells you you're looking at a person, that this is a particular colored sweater, and so forth. And you wake up every morning, every night you forget your self-system, and every morning you pick it back up instantly, right? And to the degree that that self-system has drama in it, you have to work on the fears, work on the anxiety, work on the loneliness, work on any form of reactivity. Now, when you get to this point, not only do you have an aware self within you, which is like your third, there's you and your me stories, you and your you stories, and so forth. So you're having a relationship with it. You're not identified with it. And likewise for the other person. And that makes possible a third consciousness, a relational consciousness.
A healthy relational consciousness.
And we always say that the purpose of third consciousness is to accelerate our connection to God, or to bring us deeper and deeper into love, because God and love for us are interchangeable. And so third consciousness is, what does the relationship, what does the third want? If our relationship wants to lift us to God, Richard, how do you want to listen? How do you want to speak? What do you want to respond to? What do you want to just simply be quiet about? What really matters if the relationship moment by moment is going to lift us to that higher self, that love, that deep love that is the essence of everything.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to point out that the third consciousness is not something outside of ourselves. And my experience of third consciousness is it's the basic ground. It's the basic field of love, and which is the same thing that we can connect to when we really drop deeply into meditation and deeply presence. That it's the same ground. It's not different. But when you meet another in that ground, that creates the third consciousness,
which is a living presence.
Yes.
Which you build in the moment, but the residue of that state, like the residue of being in a deep meditation, and particularly in a group deep meditation, that lives with you for a while. And therefore it encourages you to engage again from the level of third consciousness. Now, third consciousness, relational consciousness, is not in time. So you don't have to be in a hurry to fix your relationship. That would be your self system with a goal. Okay. So you're not in a hurry to get to someplace. You're landing in the what is of yourself with another, in the what is of herself or himself.
Mm-hmm.
And that creates an energy, which you feel when we drop into meditation together, because we're in a field together. That mob was also in a field, but it was the field of this collective me's that have completely collapsed into anger and blame and into stories that are false, that become the rationale, the porcupines can fly event.
Yeah.
And people get into porcupines can fly event when a transactional relationship, you don't care about me. You do this, you do that. No, you do this. No, you.
Exactly.
And it's like a tennis match, slamming things back. And then you.
Two me's.
Yeah, right.
Hacking it up.
And you do create another energy, a third, except it divides you.
Yes.
It poisons you, just like that crowd, that each one of those individuals there was poisoned by the collective field, the third, that their group mob consciousness created.
Mm-hmm. And you can feel it. It's like this, you know when you feel toxic energy, and that's what that unconsciousness creates.
And so instantaneously, if you feel that energy, you go, wait, I'm in individualistic behavior. I'm back into my assemblage point of me. I'm about protecting myself, being safe, being self-involved, right? Being in control. And that doesn't work. There's no intimacy. Even if you learn to be relatively tame companions, mm-hmm. There'll be no intimacy. You won't go into the difficult territory. You won't risk opening yourself to talk about the most vulnerable places, the discovery places, the scary places. You won't share them. You won't trust the other to come across into your world of those places of hurt, mm-hmm. Right?
And the price of that is aliveness.
Yes.
And aliveness in relationship, aliveness in yourself, and being able to really experience the joy and the heartfulness and the beauty of this life.
So in third consciousness, there's Richard, there's Kathy, and the third. At least three. But every once in a while, the depth with I'm presencing with Kathy, Kathy's presencing with me, creates this third, this that is so alive, so profoundly alive, so electric, so deeply into our bodies, that we say that third has become 5 or 10 or 50, or is approaching the infinite. Mm-hmm. 1 + 1 becoming almost infinite. Mm-hmm. And then the residue of that is just a deep, heartful trust shared day by day by day. Not every single moment are you in deep third consciousness. There's a lot of necessity that goes on in the day. But every time you engage in third consciousness, you're not transacting. You're going, what does the third want now? How would the third guide my behavior so that we are being lifted toward love? And in that way, what we see, third consciousness, is the path of awakening accelerated through relationship. It's not the individual who spends long, long hours meditating and still, when they're in relationship, may be very, very crippled because they've meditated to transcend these imprints in the body. You had images or something?
No, yeah, to transcend the pain or whatever it is that they're repressing because it's too difficult, it's too painful.
So the awake state doesn't take you out of it. The awake state teaches you how to embody even deeper into it. Mm-hmm. Now, maybe very, very rarely, some people get into such a state of oneness, but I doubt it. Because if they have to work in the field of necessity, life is extremely complex. So You have to practice this in every single relationship. You have to want it in every single relationship because you felt how your own awareness is your own aware self is setting you free. Now you want your own aware self to be in service to. The assemblage point is awareness, and you want it to be in service to limitless intimacy, no end to intimacy. You'll never arrive, and no hurry, because that consciousness is not in time. So having said that, and you're showing you the diagrams, the whole purpose in our lives, we believe, and it has always been true for me, I just had to get more and more capable of entering into third consciousness. And we've struggled along. As you said to me, what did you say yesterday? You know, we meet each other with what? Every struggle, every...
I don't remember.
Yeah.
But it's all a part of it. It's even whenever there's any tension, or it's an opportunity, and to really deepen into greater intimacy.
Yeah.
So a challenge or a conflict is not a hindrance. It can be the gateway.
You can't have awakened an aware self and be able to believe in a porcupine can fly event or a porcupine can fly belief. Logic will not be the proof of something being real. The proof of something being real is a direct embodied state.
Mm-hmm.
It is stillness, it is spaciousness, it is soft joy, it is love. The heart is activated. The heart becomes the center of consciousness. And so that could never happen. You know, people that live in third consciousness could never do that. You made a joke today. You believe in everybody. You're going to go. A mob. You were going to start a mob at the Capitol.
No, we were talking about that I believe that there's in everyone's heart there's a goodness that is the very nature of the human heart. Goodness and love, and you were like, I'm not so sure about that.
Well, I've been struggling with good and evil for a long time.
Yeah, but anyway, I was like, I'll storm the Capitol and in a peaceful way.
Storm the Capitol and say, we believe in you, senators, that you have a heart somewhere. We believe that somewhere there's a spark of wakefulness possible in you. We believe that House of Representative people, because those people are just the same as the crowd that attacked them from outside, but they have a little more rules.
Some of them.
Yeah, some of them. But almost everybody in those rooms can be very high functioning people, but they're primarily in me. They're never living really, really deep intimacy. And I say that in a measured way because I'm almost finished with Barack Obama's first book about his presidency, A Promised Land. And he's a very, very bright man with a good heart, with a real intelligence. We need that kind of leadership. We do. We need that kind of leadership. Do I think that he's awake? I do, in so many ways, as a political figure, more awake than most people. Does he live deep intimacy with his wife? Absolutely. You can see it. Did you see it in Trump and Melania Trump? Never. You know, you can just see it. And that's the world we live in. You have to understand it. And you can't stop there and be a victim of being angry about the craziness of politics. You have to say, oh, those are people lost in their me world. Those are people in assemblage point where consciousness never got further than me. The self system is all about me. And that's what they're going to create. That's what they're going to understand. It's going to be anger and fear and blame and hope, but they'll never get there, really. So with all of that said, hoping that you can resonate and look and feel some of those things in yourself and not, and realize that for me, I want to get to the end of this life as transparently open, intimate every breath, intimate every moment, every touch as I can be, just to become a limitless yes, as far as I get in this lifetime. And it doesn't matter. And I will do my best, because I think once you've reached a certain level of wakefulness, the only purpose to be here is to help others wake up. So we'll keep doing that together, individually together. And you too, you also transmit. But you have to have that ground in yourself that you don't become polarized by polarity. So, for all of those reasons, all of our meditations are about landing in the present moment in yourself and learning to navigate internally. If there's going to be, as I've often said, a stone, an epitaph that the extraterrestrials put for human beings, if Homo sapiens wipes themselves out, it'll say they identified with their thinking and they were afraid of deep feeling. So let's move into a practice of meditation. A practice in which we can guide you, and some of the things we've just said conceptually will start to make sense at a felt level, in a visualized and felt level in yourself. Why don't you start with getting us into the basic ground?
Okay. So just finding a comfortable position, feeling your feet on the floor, and closing your eyes. And you're turning your gaze inward into the body, into your interior landscape. And now noticing the breath and bringing your awareness to your breath. So taking a few deep cleansing breaths. And presencing deeply with the breath.
You're using the breath as an anchor for your awareness. You're pulling your awareness away from the self system of me, away from the past, futures, self, other stories. And you're right there. You're sitting right where you are. Breathing.
And you may notice a spaciousness that opens when you merge your awareness with the breath. And then other thoughts, concerns can begin to fade to the background. And now let's move our awareness to the soles of our feet. And again, the purpose is just presencing and relaxing. So on the in-breath, pulling the energy up from the center of the earth, traveling up through the body, your awareness with the breath as the inhale comes through the body and crests at the top of the head. And then the exhale, traveling down through the body and out through the soles of the feet. So finding your rhythm with the wave of your breath. It's like a wave cresting on the shore of the beach, cresting at the top of the head. And the exhale is like the wave receding back into the ocean.
It's a wave of your attention, your awareness, traveling up through your feet to the top of your head, like a scan. And then as you breathe out, traveling back down through the body and relaxing. Releasing.
And as you presence with your body, presencing deeply with your interior landscape, and just noticing any holding, any tension, maybe in your calves, maybe your thighs, maybe something in your belly. And you're just noticing. And on the exhale, just inviting yourself to relax a little deeper.
Breathing in and noticing with gentleness and curiosity, but very, very vivid, very awake, very alert, and breathing out and relaxing and surrendering, releasing. You're awake and relaxed. A little more curious as you breathe in, noticing, feeling throughout your being, throughout your body. And letting go, relaxing as you breathe out. And now just visualize, imagine that around you is a circle and you're at the center. Breathing, alert and relaxed. Feeling and surrendering. Around you is a circle. It's almost as if there's a sphere and you're at the center of the sphere. And in that sphere, or maybe it's easier to just visualize sitting at the center of a circle. To your left are all the ways that you've conceptualized about yourself, all your beliefs, positive and negative. But you're at the center. To your right, 180 degrees away from the me stories, are all of the beliefs and judgments about everyone and everything else. But you're at the center. Breathing, feeling, curious. Relaxing. Behind you in the circle there is the whole ground of memory. And some of those memories comes from so early that they're actually with you at the center as sensation and feeling. But all the stories, all the beliefs, all the judgments about your past, positive and negative, they're behind you. And in front of you, 180 degrees from the past, are all the ways that you can conceptualize and imagine the future, positively with hope or negatively with fear. But that's in front of you, and you're at the center. And that circle, that sphere around you, that's the self-system that was created by 9 years old. Elaborated and elaborated by life experience ever since. It's much more than mind. And you're at the center, aware. Suddenly, when you realize there are thoughts, maybe you want something more to happen, just realize that that wanting is part of your self system. It's not your aware self. The self system wants. And you come back and you're in the center again. Aware and relaxed. Sufficient as you are, and always have been sufficient as you are. Already that for which you've been seeking. That's the nature of the consciousness at the center. You feel it as stillness, peace, spaciousness. And as it goes deeper, you feel it as love. Suddenly you may find yourself comparing what you're experiencing now to previous meditations, previous experience. That's your self system. That's what was not there when you were an infant, took 9 years to form. It has to compare in order to evaluate and make decisions. But the comparison leads to judgments of better and worse, leads to satisfaction, dissatisfaction endlessly. So come back to the center. No comparison. I am already that for which I have been seeking. Breathing up through your feet, feeling, noticing, awake. Breathing down and relaxing. Resting. And gradually sitting at the center, you're developing a new relationship with your me, that self-system that you didn't have as an infant. It took 9 years. And you see all the stories about yourself, positive and negative, and you begin to feel humility, compassion for yourself. You see that everyone else lives in their stories until they wake up and start to do the work. And so there's just compassion for the suffering that never stops when we're only assembled as me. And the past is in the past, forgiven. And you begin to sense forgiveness. And the future will be as deep and as rich as you're living right now, wherever you arrive at some future moment, at the center. And so whenever you think to the future, this trust. Yes, I'll find the center of myself then. Trust. The very nature of this consciousness at the center is limitless love and compassion. And you have tastes of it as stillness, as spaciousness, as quietness and calm. And then there's the breath in the body. And whatever feeling is still imprinted in the body from the past, doesn't matter why it's there or what happened. It's in your body, maybe in your chest, maybe in your throat, maybe in your guts. And you breathe to it, touching it very, very softly. And just relax. You listen to it, you feel it, you welcome it. Gradually, gradually. And it contributes to your humility. That relationship with your own wounds. And it contributes, that relationship to your own wounds, right in your body, contributes to your compassion. And if you can hold these feelings, it contributes to your trust. And because you can hold them right now, there's only forgiveness for the past.
If you're noticing any pain or an intense sensation, maybe in your throat, just turn your awareness toward the sensation. Maybe it's a pain in the heart. And just gently breathe with it. Whatever it is, congestion in the head. Just turning toward it like a loving friend. And gently breathing. Meeting that sensation with deep reverence, deep compassion. And maybe the pain has something to share with you. Maybe there's a story of how it came to be. And you just presence with it.
The sensation will change. If images come, memories come, stay with the sensation and it will move, it will change. Not because you want it to change. This consciousness doesn't want. It's the quality of the touch, the quality of how you're presencing. The gentler the touch, the less you have to defend from this sensation.
And there's an innate intelligence in the body, an innate impetus toward health and healing. And just allowing that energy to work within you. Holding it all in a space of openness, acceptance, love, and compassion.
Sometimes what you experience isn't localized. It's like your whole being. It's like a cloud. It's like a mood. Maybe it can be very dark. I would sit down day after day, year after year, and eventually find a sensation of being unsafe. Sometimes it would be there right away. And I know it comes from my early childhood injuries, which were in fact severe allergy and asthma. A deep sense of being unsafe in the body many, many times, even with loving parents. And so in my practice, I sat with it so that fear would not push me, unsafety wouldn't push me, that it would become the friend. And it has gradually. And I've understood that that fear, that darkness, that unsafety has actually always been the ally of love. The more I held it, the more love became truer and truer to me. Not just because I awakened to that 40 plus years ago, but because it returned again and again as I held the fear, as I held the unsafety in the body. Not 10 times, thousands of times. So that the spaciousness isn't crowded out by fear and anxiety, which becomes thinking. So that the ground is there. The timeless, beginningless, endless ground.
And the deep peace is always here. Love is always here.
Just you're in the center of the circle, the center of the sphere. It's not that you just leave and go into the mind, you go into the self system created by 9 years old. And then you come back to the consciousness that's beginning and endless, that is your ground, and in your body. As it says in Scripture, in this flesh we shall know God. And the breath is just coming in, the wave of awareness traveling up the body, down the body. Very awake, very awake. And deeply, deeply still, deeply relaxed.
And we may know this ordinary life as incredibly extraordinary. Deep appreciation for the preciousness of this life, this unique you.
Now let's prepare to leave this specific practice. But a part of you is always at the center. And when you open your eyes, as we invite you to do, you'll see the room or the place in which you're sitting, thanks to your self system. You'll know that that's a computer screen in front of you. That this is your body as a concept, as an object, thanks to that self system. But you don't have to step back into the me, built around fear, control, safety, security. There's always the next breath. We can absolutely be sure when we watch those scenes of the mob, nobody had a single conscious breath. Not one. So here we are together. We're going to invite Christian, who's been following the chat. We don't expect many people put things in the chat during the meditation, or at least we hope not. But now, if you have some simple reflection of where you are in yourself, what you experience, or some insight you had, something you suddenly understood, and you can put it in there. We'd love to hear it. And of course, maybe eventually, long ago learned not to ask for questions, but sometimes it's important. In groups, I found that instead of asking questions, just keep affirming what you experienced, whether you liked it or not. Just acknowledge where you are. Share that, because that's much truer often than the question.
And the questions often take us into our heads.
Yeah. And sometimes that's necessary.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll see. But we have another full 15 minutes, a little more. Let's see what emerges. And we certainly want to hear some of where you have been.
Well, I can tell you we have already some contributions because they actually happened early on in the first part.
Mm-hmm.
And interestingly, it's 2 quotes that we got in the chat, which come from 2 of the world's philosophical and spiritual traditions. So the first quote is, "The only certain barrier to truth is the belief that you already have it." Voltaire. Second quote, "Everyone sees the unseen in proportion to the clarity of their hearts." Rumi.
There you go. The self system can think it knows that it's arrived at an end. Just come to the center and you're at the beginning's beginning. So any belief is going to be an obstacle. And yet we need them to orchestrate many things in the field of necessity, if only the beliefs would be obedient to our hearts. The ground was love, and then porcupines don't fly. They walk on the ground and they do what they do, and it's magnificent. What else is there?
We also have a comment on the American political situation, because they, the Republican leaders, aren't acting together based on a higher purpose or belief. They are terrified of incurring Trump's wrath.
Me.
Yeah. Sad.
It's sad. These are people who the assemblage point is no further than me, my security, my power, my importance. They have gone to Yale, they've gone to Harvard, they've gone to Princeton. Some of them are very, very well educated. They're incredibly high functioning. Some of them have made fortunes in other businesses. And yet, they're the victims of fear. Fear of not being elected. Fear that if they're not elected, someone worse will be elected. That's how they justify it. They have no trust. They have no forgiveness.
But also, we've also seen, some who are willing to stand up, and really that, that comes down to, like, how do you want to live your life? And those moments where there's an opportunity to really take a stand for something from your heart, or to stand up against fear or all of the manipulation that's been happening with stories and lies. And it's like, who do you want to be?
Yeah. It's easy to point our fingers at the Republican leadership, but it's there in all people at that level of consciousness, one side or another. It seems to me a political affiliation is also an expression of our feeling intelligence, a recognition of certain things that are let's say, universally true as opposed to abstractly true. Economics is basically a series of abstractions that are often very, very cruel whenever implemented. What would economics look like if it started from a deep feeling intelligence, a heart? If it started from love? I don't think either political system ultimately has, either party has a greater, I would almost say that the Republicans are a little more left brain and there's a little more right brain and heart in the premises of the Democrats. But it's much more complicated than that. I think you just have to look with a lot of compassion and not blame anyone.
There is also, on a completely different subject, a sharing that just has to be shared. Someone says, our couple met in the third and has never left. Not engaged in power struggle for 33 years. Never needed to power struggle.
Oh,
What a blessing.
what a blessing. Hmm.
There's also a beautiful silence. Well, this seems to be the session of quotes. This time, the author Louis L'Amour. You will come to a place where you think it is the end, that everything is over. That will be the beginning.
T.S. Eliot said, in my beginning is my end. To arrive where we, T.S. Eliot says, to arrive where we began and know it for the first time. What is he pointing to? He's saying, well, we always started in the present moment. The baby was there but didn't know it was the present moment. 9 years later, it's assembled in me. Okay? And then it can wake up again and go to the same deep connection to that limitless consciousness that the baby has. But every moment is a new beginning. Louis L'Amour wrote wonderful Western stories. I loved him. But he was also a deep thinker. Unless it's a different Louis L'Amour. He was a part of my teenage years. I've always believed that if you had a context for understanding practice, you could practice more effectively. It's always been true for me. Some of these images, maybe they'll help you. You won't say, oh, I've come back into my head. You'll say, oh, I'm back into my self-system. And that's why I'm this in the future. And that's why I'm doing that about the past. And those are why, well, I'm back in myself. Now I'm back in awareness. One breath later, half a breath, the beginning of a conscious breath later. You'll realize that you're looking around at everybody. They're caught in their me, you, past, future stories. That's a self system. And it's not really conscious. It has within it the capacity to become conscious. But because it's only wanting pleasure and avoiding pain, wants safety or control, it's not conscious. Not really. So gradually we wake up in all kinds of different ways. which is why we're together, why we're sharing all this, why you responded to our invitation. And that awakening is happening deeply throughout the species. That's beautiful. Every one of us has to be born limitless consciousness as an infant, become limited in me, and then liberated again. But some of us are more and more awake earlier and earlier. And the more that we can contribute to a world in which people inflict less adverse childhood experiences on their children, the more we collectively as a species will be able to deepen in consciousness and solve our problems starting from heart, starting from a ground in a felt sense of the love and beauty that is the fabric of our universe, the basic order of nature.
Yes. Somebody says, it may be that the myth of authority is one of the most dangerous superstitions ever programmed into collective consciousness.
Yeah, you project into those people what you want to believe they are for your own sake. We create saints and saviors, and every one of them was just a person. We create, some people believe Donald Trump was a savior, here to save us from what they believe he's saving us from, his craziness. But people have done that forever. People thought of that. People in Germany thought that way about Hitler. Others projected incredibly beautiful golden projections onto Gandhi and Nelson Mandela. Not because they weren't good people, but they still were people. Some people surrendered themselves so utterly to the guru, and they forget that that's just a person.
By the way, it appears that the last sharing was also a quote from L'Amour. It is possible, if I'm reading it right.
Well, I think it's also out of these, this me, you know, this a desire to dominate or power over, but the real strength is when we are able to really access the power within and move from that place.
I think as more and more people live in third consciousness, within themselves and in a shared dynamic of relationship, within yourself, you'll find a peace, stillness, a deep energy, and it will radiate from you. But the power of living that in relationship radiates much more strongly. Much more strongly. And that's why I worked with groups, because the group energy activated and deepened the people's individual process, dropped them closer to that inner ground in themselves, much faster than if they sat for that many days in just long meditation periods, which also will take you into a very deep ground in yourself. It hasn't taught you very, very much about any dimension of relationship. So.
An expression of thank you. I find it easier to go more deeply inside myself and also become more expansive whenever I've been in the presence of you or your offering. So I want to thank you, Richard and Kathy.
And thank you.
Is it possible that 2 weeks from now is our last webinar?
That is correct.
How do you feel about that?
A lot of relief at one level. I mean, it's what we're really trying to do is kind of create a seminar in a way, and you know, feeling like we're all together, and it's challenging in so many ways, but yeah, it's the energy that gets created is felt, and you can share that, you can send that out into the world.
Yeah. Everything we have a relationship with, whether it's the feeling inside of ourselves that we've never learned to make space for and learn to gradually, or it's some person you imagine in your mind. How you hold that person in your mind actually becomes a presence. Mm-hmm. If you hold them with judgment, anger, you're a darker person and the field around you is darker. If you hold them in gratitude and compassion and forgiveness, you become brighter, you shine, and that goes out into the world. It's instant by instant by instant. Third consciousness is being created. It's like an ocean in which we all live, and we're making it more and more light. We're letting it lead us to love through relationships. And we're long past the time where most of us are going to take this journey in some monastic setting. Mm-hmm. We're doing it in the world. There's no way around that. And some of us may be solitaries and live by ourselves and are content in that. And you can deepen profoundly in yourself and share richness with others. Some of us are trying to find a way in which we can let the third that's changing me, changing how I feel in my body, how I live, what I think, let our relationship come through.
And we're out of time.
I know. So blessings, everyone. We'll be with you in 2 weeks. You are free to go back and to any of these meditations and listen to them again. If you don't, maybe our words are enough, but listen to them and take that journey and then start to understand yourself in that journey, because no one can ultimately teach anyone meditation, and nobody really knows what meditation is, but it is the capacity for relationship to anything in the moment. And you teach yourself it, and then it teaches you, and you teach yourself it, and it teaches you. And eventually you do sit there without wanting, with no place to go, and very right here. And that's not the end either.
So thank you, Christian. Thank you, Alan. Thank you all for joining us.
Pleasure.
And it's not your birthday, but you can blow out the candle again.
Let's do it together.
Okay.